بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وقدوتنا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأزكى التسليم اللهم أعلمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Today we have, it's Saturday night, so we're talking about who is Allah, understanding Allah's beautiful names, excellent names, perfect names. And we have made it to Al-Basir. Last class we talked about As-Sami', the all-hearing. And this class we will cover, inshallah, its complement, Al-Basir, the one who sees everything. Just like As-Sami', Al-Basir occurs in the Quran over 40 times. And so, as we've said, it's not just a principle of the Quran, it's a principle of textual interpretation, no matter what you're reading, which is that the more volume and the more space something takes up, the more important it is, right? That Allah is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim is much more important than that He's Qahir, because Allah chose to begin every surah, except for one of them, with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So that should tell you that when it comes to the names of Allah, some of them are more important than others. Some of them are more central than others. Allah's mercy and compassion is more central than His ability, His irresistible ability to conquer and overcome and subdue. Right? And so As-Sami' Al-Basir, very common names, each of them occurring over 40 times, should tell you that this is a very, very important quality of Allah that He wants you to think about and ponder and connect with. So Al-Basir is the one who has complete vision, who observes everything, no matter how small, no matter how hidden, no matter how secretive. Now, similarly to As-Sami' and to many of the names of Allah, it refers to an activity that we also partake in ourselves. We also hear. We also see. Right? So, just as a little exercise, we'll ask the students present, what if you were explaining these names of Allah to somebody, As-Sami', Al-Basir, the all-seeing, the all-hearing, and they say, wait a second, Allah can't be like the creation. He can't see in the same way that I see. I need light to see. I need eyes to see. I need certain conditions to see. Sight requires location, right? Because I'm looking out at something that is observed. Therefore, since this name seems to communicate or imply some sort of limitation of Allah and likeness with the creation, As-Sami' and Al-Basir, rather, instead of taking them upon their apparent meanings, we have to say that these are just secret code names of Allah that we don't really know what they mean at all. Huh? How does that sound? How would you respond to such a person? As-Sami' Al-Basir, they're just sounds. We can't know what they mean. They might mean something, but it's completely out of our ability to know, because the only seeing that we know requires location, it requires direction, requires certain muscles, implies physical limitations. You need light. Anybody want to take a crack at it? Okay. One participant says, if pertaining to Allah, the same rules won't apply like they would for humans. Why not? If someone says, this is what sight means, this is what hearing is, this is a logical necessity, it's not anything other than that. Well, we could ask such a person, do you exist? Okay, our seeing is very limited, but Allah's seeing and hearing is a whole other sense. He can see your heart. Okay, good. We can end the conversation very quickly. We can say, do you exist? He has to say yes. Does Allah exist? He has to say yes. Is your existence like Allah's existence? If he says no, then that's it. If he says yes, then he's got bigger issue. So no, Allah's existence is not like my existence. My existence is deficient. It's full of weakness. It's full of tragedy and loss and shortcomings and frustrations, limitations, unfulfilled projects and hopes and things like that. I mean, that's not all my life, but I mean, like, it's there in life, right? Which wouldn't be there in the life of a perfect being, right? And so that's my life. That's not Allah's life. That's not Allah's existence, let's say. That's my existence. Allah's existence is not comprised or doesn't have anything of those types of limitations or frustrations or unfulfilled hopes or setbacks, mistakes, those sorts of things. So if Allah's existence is not like my existence, but yet we must affirm that Allah exists as we must affirm that I exist, then why should we treat any of Allah's names and characteristics any different than that? Yes, exactly. Very good. The Sheikh family has put their finger on something important. The assumption that is made whereby someone wants to say, no, it can't mean that because it would logically necessitate X, Y, or Z. The assumptions that they're making are incorrect. They're assuming likeness between Allah and the creation. If you assume the likeness between Allah and the creation, then you must reject it by going to the opposite extreme, which is to negate meaning from any of Allah's names or attributes. Say, no, Allah must not hear with ears, with sound waves, with these sorts of things, and therefore Sami' must not mean anything like what we know hearing means, right? So it's because of the assumption of similitude or similarity that then necessitates that they go to the other extreme and deny and vacate the name of any meaning whatsoever. And that can, depending on these sorts of things, as you said, can lead people to get into some hot water. So no, we don't need to do all that. We don't need to throw out the meaning of Allah's names that He put in the Quran purposefully and told us to reflect upon them. How are we supposed to reflect upon them if they don't mean anything? If they're just secret code words, sounds? No, they're placed there. They have an apparent meaning. We accept the meaning. And we say that it's not like anything else that we know of. Yes, it's hearing, but it's not like hearing. It's not like our hearing. Yes, it's seeing, but it's not like our seeing. And if we go further than that, to say that Allah sees with eyes, or that he grasps with hands and fingers, then we don't do it because of logical necessity. We don't do it because we're thinking or saying to ourselves, well, the only type of grasping that we know of happens with hands, and therefore it has to happen like that with Allah. No, we do it because there's other revelation that either affirms that or establishes that. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, who said the Dajjal is one-eyed and Allah is not one-eyed, right? Or Allah says in the Quran, "Tajri bi a'yunina," referring to his eyes. So this is something that we're not making up due to logical necessity, due to our assumption that Allah is like the creation. But it's something that epistemologically, right? We're talking about how do we know what we know? When it comes to Allah and his attributes, his essence and his activity, this is something that is not based off of observation, though it might be confirmed by observation. It's not something that's based off of logical deduction, though it might be backed up by logical deduction. It's something that is primarily and fundamentally in the text and the revelation. If Allah says that he is this thing, who are we then to say, well, no, not really. He didn't really mean that. When he says that he is that, he repeats it over 40 times. He tells you to ponder upon it. He puts it in contexts which imply the apparent meaning that we're aware of, that Allah is able to observe and see everything. Who are we then to vacate that name from its meaning and its purpose and its characteristic? So Allah's sight is not dependent in the same way in which our sight is dependent. His sight, just like his existence and his knowledge and everything else, is absolute and it's primary. It's not conditional. It's not secondary. It's not derived. It doesn't have to wait for permission. It doesn't have to overcome some limitation, whereas ours does. Our sight and our hearing, it happens through physical means, through organs. It's because it happens through physical organs. It's limited in what it can observe. And therefore, it is quite limited, both in the time span that we experience that sense, which is just a mere 50, 60, 70 years, some of us not more, less than that. And during the time that we do it, there's only a certain amount of frequencies that we can hear. We depend upon frequencies to hear in the first place. All these sorts of things that talk about the material world and our being situated within the material world, that structures our dependency upon it. Allah is outside of the material world, not part of the material creation. And therefore, the rules that apply here, as the Shaykh family said, does not apply to Allah. What are the implications of Allah's name Al-Basir, the all-seeing? One of them is that we are always under Allah's watch. And that has two moods to it, two flavors. One of them is encouragement. Actually, it's encouragement. If the first thing that you thought was, oh, here it comes again, the Imam is going to talk about how Allah is always watching, and so you better be nice. Yes, that's there too. That's there too. But it doesn't have to be just that. It can also be that Allah sees your pain. Allah sees you making dua. Allah sees the stuff that you don't get any recognition for. Allah sees your struggles. Allah sees your deeds, whether you've done them completely alone, no one else knows about them, or whether other people saw them. If other people saw them and thought that you were just showing off, oh, here's this mutawa, this pious guy, he's just showing off. Everybody in the world could think that you're showing off, but Allah sees. And Allah sees what they don't see. So understanding that Allah is Al-Basir in the encouraging way should free us and liberate us from having any expectation that the creation is going to give us validation, appreciation, or compensation. And that is one of the purest forms of freedom and liberation that there is. Because most of what we do, let's be honest, is not for Allah. It's for other people. Even the nice things we do for other people often is really just kind of business. I'm doing something nice for you because I hope that you would do something nice for me in the future, even if it's not a guaranteed thing. It's not a pre-made arrangement. You're kind of banking on it. You're like putting pennies in your piggy bank, saving up for a rainy day when you might need that sort of help. That's business. That's business. That's not doing business with Allah. That's not sincerity or sincere intention. Sincere intention is doing something with the expectation or the realization that no one's going to ever do anything for you in return. People might even have completely misinterpreted you and got you wrong. You might have been run out of town on a rail, and people talking about you and bad-mouthing you and gossip and everybody's, but you know that Allah is al-Basir. If you know that Allah is al-Basir, then it doesn't care. You don't care. It doesn't bother you. You know that Allah has observed it. He's your witness. And it's all going to get sorted out at the end of the day. If you're going through hardship, sometimes coming to places like the masjid can be the hardest thing to do when you're going through hardship, because a lot of times people are in cliques, right? They don't kind of reach out and talk to people across boundaries of either ethnicity or social class or friends or whatever. Or if they do, then it's really light, like, hi, how you doing? You know, how's everything? But the person's shy. Someone could be really going through something and they're not going to take that opportunity to be like, actually, things are really hard. Actually, I could really use help, or I could really use some advice. Very, very few people will do that. And the people that do that, we kind of try to socialize them to not do that because it's uncomfortable. Right? It's true. But Allah is al-Basir. He sees everything. So even if you keep coming back to the masjid, you're hoping, you're just begging Allah to send you someone that will just take this problem away from you or relieve your hardship, and it doesn't come, you know at the end of the day that Allah sees you. And if Allah sees you and Allah is Ar-Rahman and He's Al-Wadud, then you know that you are in good hands, as we said, even if the creation gives you nothing. Knowing that Allah sees everything also should liberate us from the ambiguity of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen next. Especially in North America, we love to plan. We love to know what is the next 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. And this is good. This is a sunnah to think like that, right? But if you go someplace else in the world, things are a lot more haphazard. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't even know the process. All you know is you have to show up to this office and you wait around like with everybody else. And then you kind of are going to figure it out through osmosis. What's the next step? You can't plan 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. That's one of the hardest things that North American students in Medina had to adjust to, is that over there's you don't know the process. You just have to go along for the ride. So knowing that Allah is al-Basir and reflecting upon that Allah sees, Allah knows all the steps that are in front of you. He knows what's going to happen. And it's already written. It's basically already secured. So if it's already willed, it's already written, it's already secured, how much should you worry about it? How much should you stay up at night tossing and turning, perseverating about what's going to happen? If Allah sees, Allah knows, and Allah is Ar-Rahman, and He told you in 113 chapters out of 114, then maybe we don't have so much to worry about. Of course, as we said, this is the encouraging sign of Al-Basir, but there is also the warning sign that Allah is watching. And much of sin, if not most of it, happens when the devil temporarily deceives us or makes us forget that Allah is watching. You've probably seen in your time on social media these kind of videos that are like security cameras, right? Where somebody's about to do something bad, but then they realize in the process or just after they did that bad thing, they realize that they're on a security camera. I saw this one video of a guy that was, he was a pickpocket, right? He was standing in line. He was like sizing a guy up. He slowly reaches out, he plucks his wallet from his back pocket and he's putting it into his own pocket. And then he turns around and he sees a security camera. And then he just like, he knows that he's caught, he's turned, he saw his face, everything. So what he does is he throws the wallet on the ground and then he taps the guy in front of him and he points down to the wallet. He said, "Hey, you dropped your wallet." And then he turns back to the camera and he kind of gives like a thumbs up because he realized that he was under surveillance. How pious would people be if they realized that they were always under surveillance? We are always under surveillance. We're always under Allah's surveillance, which is much more, which is much greater and much more comprehensive and much more merciful, but also much more scary than being under the surveillance of a masjid or a store or even the government. Allah, those sort of entities can only punish you a little bit in this life. Allah can punish you for eternity if He sees fit, right? So we are under surveillance, but we don't act like it, right? We act like when we're alone with ourselves, when we're at our most sincere, right? We act like we are truly alone, even though we intellectually know that we're not. How do we bridge the gap? How do we bridge the gap of our intellectual understanding and our poor performance? That's why Allah gave us dhikr, the remembrance. That's why the dhikr is so important. That's why the dhikr is something that the pious people have trained themselves to be their default. And I wish I could count myself among them, but I can't, honestly. It's something I aspire to, and I hope you do too. To be constantly making dhikr so that if you are dragged away, if you are deluded for a second, you've trained yourself to come back to that dhikr. And you won't forget Allah as easily. You won't forget the surveillance that you're under nearly as easily. It's good that Allah is Al-Basir. And this is another aspect of encouragement that I forgot to mention, which is that we can trust in true justice, eternal justice, because Allah is Al-Basir. When it comes to this life, think about your childhood. Did you ever get smacked by one of your siblings? And then when your parents were turned around, right? And then they turn around and you're crying and you're like, "Oh my God, like they hit me." And they're like, "I didn't see it." Well, that's a quaint example. What about all of the atrocities that go on throughout the world, especially the Muslim world, and they're not witnessed? Or the people who are witnessing those atrocities aren't saying anything. And think about Allah who sees everything and witnesses everything. And think about the punishment that He has in store for people who thought that they got away with something in this world. A last reflection on Al-Basir is that it is one of the names and attributes that Allah has told us is a criteria for divinity. So during our khutbahs the last month or so, we've been talking about Surah Al-Furqan and how in the beginning of Surah Al-Furqan, Allah lays out these criteria for being able to judge what is and is not divine. And one of these criteria is the ability to see. That in order to be divine, you have to be able to see and observe. And all of the things that we just talked about flesh out why that is. Because if you're going to establish justice, you have to be able to see and observe the wrong. If you're going to give the people of good, the people of faith, their comeuppance, their true reward at the end, you need to be able to see what they have done all along the way. If you are going to inspire or scare people into acting right, not oppressing each other in this world, you have to be able to observe what's going on. So anything which is not just blind, but limited, conditional in its vision, in its sight, dependent upon light, dependent upon direction, not having an opaque object in between you and the thing to be seen. All of these limitations exposes false gods right away. Just like we said in the khutbah, the Quraysh kind of intuited this. They kind of felt that their idols that they had in front of them, even if they claimed that they were really like metaphorical representations of something that was great or something more spiritual, the fact that they put it into an idol made them conceive of the idols of having the same limitations as they did when it comes to seeing, when it came to hearing. And so sometimes the Quraysh, they would kind of whisper behind their backs about something that was even against the idol, or do something out of the sight of the idol, and imagine that that thing which they worshiped didn't see it. They were worshiping something which they admitted couldn't see or observe them in all situations. What kind of God is that? What kind of divinity is that? It's not divinity. It's a false idol. It's a false God. Good. So we will try to get away with, can we get through one more name? Inshallah. Al-Aleem. The next name is Al-Aleem, the all-knowing. Even more so than Al-Basir, As-Sami'. Allah mentions Al-Aleem over 150 times in the Quran. It refers to perfect knowledge. We go back to how do we reconcile the fact that we have knowledge and Allah has knowledge. It's the same exact thing as the existence. Allah exists, I exist. Is my existence like Allah's existence? No, it is not. Is my knowledge like Allah's knowledge? No, it is not. Allah has perfect knowledge. It has no beginning. It has no end, and it has no deficiency. Nothing is outside of the purview, is outside of the sphere of Allah's knowledge. Allah isn't surprised by anything. He knew everything that was going to happen long before, from the very beginning, before it even occurred or was written down even. Understanding Allah's knowledge is the solution to what's known in Western philosophy as the free will problem, right? So the question goes, or the dilemma supposedly goes, if Allah knows that evil is going to happen and doesn't stop that evil from happening, is Allah responsible? Has he in fact then committed that evil? For the sake of time, there are three different responses to this. Two of them go to extremes that we don't want to get into, kind of like our previous situation. So one response is that people get scared of that situation and say, no, he doesn't know what's going to happen until it happens. Right? And I think it should be obvious the problematic nature of that response. If you're saying that Allah doesn't know that it happens until it happens, then his knowledge is very, very, very limited. He doesn't have foreknowledge according to that perspective. He only has knowledge as things are happening, which is a weakness, which is a limitation, because that means that Allah didn't know and now he knew, right? Which means that if he didn't know something was about to happen, it means he's incapable of stopping that thing from happening. What kind of God is that? The second response is to go to the other extreme and say, well, then there's no free will. Allah knew it's going to happen and it's happening that way, and so therefore that's it. There's no choice. And some people do that actually happy, because then they're justified for whatever they do. And some people do that as a criticism of the idea of God in the first place. They say that, what's this? If God has perfect knowledge, then everybody, they're just playing out roles like in a play. He's written the script and he wrote the script, so if I do something bad, then that's his fault. So what is the just response to this situation? The just response is that knowing about something is not the same as doing something. That's simply the fact. If you have your child, for example, you know what your child likes and what they don't like. You know what motivates them and doesn't motivate them. Even if as a parent you struggle to motivate them sometimes, you know there's a couple surefire things to get them to do what you want. They might not be things that you want to give them, right? But you know that those things are there. Break glass in case of emergency. So if you ask your child and you say, if you do this, I'll give you this, then you pretty much know what they're going to respond with. Just like you know what doesn't motivate them. It's probably easier in that situation, especially if you have teenagers. You know that if you offer them this thing that they don't care about, they're going to reject you and not going to take up your offer. Does that mean that you have rejected your offer? No, of course it doesn't. They're the one that had the choice, the free will, and they exercise that free will. And your knowledge with maybe 99% certainty of what they were going to choose does not negate that free will at all. Well, all you're doing in the situation with Allah is you're eliminating that 1% of uncertainty. Allah knows with 100% certainty what you're going to choose. He's still going to present you the choice. He will will the whole situation to happen. But from your perspective, you don't know what you're going to choose. And because of that, that creates the moral moment, the moral accountability. You are making a decision. And you have to live with the results and the consequences of that decision. Just because Allah knew what you were going to choose doesn't mean you're not any worse for choosing. You didn't know what you were going to choose. So the decision is still on you. I think that puts us at a good stopping point for today. Does anybody have any final questions, comments, concerns before we dismiss for this evening?
Assalamualaikum. So, Sheikh, but it's already written, like even before the earth was created, what we were destined to do, what we were going to watch in our destiny, so stuff like that. So, how do we explain that with this concept?
How do we reconcile free will?
Yeah.
It's the same issue. So from even if, like we'll imagine from Allah's perspective, He knows. You don't know. Right? So there's an asymmetry of knowledge going on. Since Allah knows and you don't know, when you're in that situation, from your perspective, is the decision already made? Are you simply like if we're going to like do the reading a role analogy, like because somebody who is saying that predestination, it's all figured out ahead of time, which it is figured out, but it doesn't mean that Allah is doing our actions for us and therefore we're not responsible for them. So like the doubt comes in if you imagine it like a play. You imagine that all of us are actors and we have a script and we're reading off of the script. Okay? The script is written by Allah. Then in that situation, you could think, well, I'm going to blame the screenwriter if I say something that's messed up. But we don't have a script in our hand that we're reading off of. Allah has the script with him. As far as we know, we're choosing what we get to say and what we don't get to say. It feels authentic. It feels real in the moment. And it is real in the sense that we're choosing our words. So just because Allah knows that what words we're going to choose, Allah knows what decisions we're going to make, doesn't negate the fact that it's still our choice, especially from our perspective. If we knew what Allah knew, then it would be different. Then there would be no free will, right? Then we would be like, well, I know that I'm going to die in this way, in this time, in this place, and I know that I'm going to have this and that and the other. But Allah has purposely hidden that from us, creating the moral moments, creating moments of moral choice. So even if it was written down, what's going to happen, that knowledge, that's written with knowledge. It's written with a knowing of what's going to be decided. But the thing still has to be decided, and it still is a decision because of the asymmetry of information. Does that make sense?
Yes. Jazakallah khair.
Okay. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. Allahu ta'ala a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad.